I have more money than everyone here in this court, and I am the owner of everything.
The first thing he did when he sat down at the defense table was look at the jury and smile. Not a nervous smile, not a polite one, a predator's smile. Measured, slow, cold, as if he were in a boardroom, and 12 ordinary people were just another group of employees he was about to bend to his will. His name was Victor Hale, CEO, founder, face of a billion-dollar corporation whose logo glowed on glass towers and app icons across the country. He was the man on magazine covers, in business conferences, on stage talking about disruption and vision. Today, he was somewhere he never expected to be. Not on a stage, not on a panel, on trial, facing a jury, under the eye of Judge Joseph Wapner. And he walked into that courtroom utterly convinced of one thing, that he could manage this like everything else, that he could dominate this room like every other room. He did not understand yet that this room did not belong to him, that this audience did not answer to him, that this was the one place where his power would not protect him, where his ego was not an asset, but a target. And Judge Wapner had perfect aim. Victor Hale looked like he'd been manufactured to play CEO in a movie. Tall, broad-shouldered, late 40s, early 50s, the exact age where success hardened into permanent confidence. His hair was dark, streaked with just enough gray to read experienced, not old. His jaw was clean-shaven. His skin was the kind that had never known fluorescent warehouse lights or long days on a factory floor. Custom charcoal suit, white shirt, subtle dark tie, not a thread out of place. A watch on his wrist that cost more than some of the jurors' cars. He sat with the posture of someone who absolutely believed the room revolved around him. Back straight, chest open, one arm draped across the back of his chair in a way that screamed, "I own this space." His eyes roamed over the jurors like he was studying a new market segment, profiling them, measuring them, one by one. A schoolteacher, a postal worker, a nurse, a mechanic, faces that carried tired lines and quiet histories. To him, they were just people, ordinary, replaceable, the kind of people who used his products, stocked his warehouses, answered his customer service lines. The kind of people he laid off in bulk with clean phrases like restructuring and strategic shift. He didn't see danger when he saw them. He saw opportunity. He didn't realize yet that, in this room, they were something rare and deadly to someone like him. They were 12 people he could not fire. 12 people who could vote on something he could not veto. 12 people he could not buy. At least, not directly. He smiled again. The cameras caught it. They always did. The charges against him were not small. They weren't flashy, like insider trading or tax evasion. They were worse. They were about harm. Real. Human. Meat and bone. The company he built, Hale's East Logistics, ran warehouses across the country. Millions of packages. Thousands of employees. On the surface, it was the backbone of convenience. Underneath, it was something else. Supervisors pushed impossible quotas. Workers were punished for taking bathroom breaks. Injuries were logged and then quietly erased. When people got hurt, they were pulled aside, given forms, told to keep it in-house. Insurance claims went missing. Safety violations were called isolated incidents. Over time, it stopped looking like oversight and started looking like a system. One where people's bodies were the price of delivery times. One where profits always rose, while compensation claims somehow stayed flat. A man named Carlos Vega had shattered his spine in one of Hale's warehouses when a forklift, driven by an exhausted temps working a double shift, clipped a pallet that had been stacked beyond safety regulations. The fall snapped him in half. He would never walk again. The internal report called it employee error. The safety officer quit a month later. And he didn't just quit. He took something with him. Files, emails, embedded security footage, evidence. He took it to a lawyer, who took it to the press, who took it to regulators. And somewhere along that path, the story stopped being about one injured man and started being about something bigger. A culture, a pattern, a CEO. They followed the chain of decisions. The memos, the quarterly targets, the meetings where downtime was called non-productive exposure. The memos signed by Hale himself, urging maximum throughput, ambitious targets, and lean safety adjustment. The case that landed in court was framed as corporate negligence, willful disregard for safety, systemic abuse. There were big words on the paperwork. But when boiled down, it was simple. The question before the jury was, did this man, this CEO, know that his system was hurting people and choose profit anyway? Victor believed the answer was irrelevant. He believed there was another question, more important. Could he make them like him anyway? Could he make them doubt what they saw? Could he bend this room the way he bent others? He was about to find out. From the first minute, his attitude poisoned the air. When the clerk read out the case title, he shared a smirk with his lead attorney, who names a company after themselves and doesn't think they're invincible. He did. He had spent years standing on dark stages with spotlights in his eyes, telling rooms full of investors that risk was opportunity wearing a different jacket. He had told them to be bold and hungry and unafraid of breaking things. Now, the thing that had broken was a man's spine. He still didn't feel guilty. He felt annoyed. Annoyed that something as trivial as an injury had reached him. Annoyed that regulators had decided to make an example of him. Annoyed that he had to sit here and listen to people who had never built anything lecture him about safety and ethics. His lawyer had told him, do not antagonize the jury. Do not address them directly. Do not talk down to the judge. He had nodded, then almost laughed. He had spent years closing nine-figure deals with men twice as powerful as anyone in this room. He didn't take advice from people who worked by the hour, especially not when he believed he could read a room better than anyone. He thought this was still opponent research. He didn't understand that this time, he was the one under the microscope. Judge Joseph Wapner entered. The room stood. This time, Hale stood with everyone else. Straight away. Posture perfect. He wasn't stupid. He knew there were rituals you didn't play with. But as he sat, his eyes met the judge's for a brief moment. He flashed a faint, polite grin. The kind you use at a networking event. Wapner's face didn't change, but his eyes did. Just slightly. They sharpened. He'd seen that smile before. The one that said, I see you as another variable. Another person to navigate. Maybe charm. Maybe pressure. Maybe manipulate. It didn't impress him. It warned him. The prosecution walked the jury through the story, brick by heavy brick. They showed the warehouse layouts, the schedules, the internal charts tracking units per hour. They showed memos from management warning that safety stops and line holds were eating margins. They showed an email from Hale himself. On a screen, under the courtroom's pale glow, his words appeared. Safety is important, but overcautiousness is killing our speed. We need a cultural shift. People who can't hit targets are in the wrong place. We're not running a daycare. We're building a machine. He didn't flinch when they read it. He remembered sending that email. He'd been proud of it. It had sounded tough, decisive, leader-like. Now, read in this room, to these ears, it sounded like something else. Cold, cutthroat, indifferent. The prosecutor introduced video from inside the warehouse. The sound was tinny, but the images were clear. Boxes flying down conveyors. Workers hustling, sweating, sprinting between shelves. A supervisor shouting, faster, faster, let's go. Someone stumbling. Someone lifting too much. Someone rubbing their back. And then, finally, the clip that made the jury stiffen. The accident. A forklift turns. Too fast. A pallet tipped. Another worker in the wrong place because the lanes were too tight. The floor too crowded. The training too rushed. A crash. A fall. A body hitting concrete in a way that bones were never meant to meet. The camera froze on the aftermath. Carlos Vega at the bottom of a broken tower of boxes. Half his body twisted wrong. Still, the gallery didn't gasp. They just shrank into themselves, as if trying to pull away from the inevitability of gravity. Hale watched the video like someone reviewing an old ad campaign. Eyes slightly narrowed. Detached. He didn't look at Carlos sitting in his wheelchair near the front, hands folded in his lap. He looked at the angles, the equipment, the workflow. Even now, a part of him was thinking, that aisle was too narrow. I told them to widen it. If they'd listened to me, we wouldn't be here. He still blamed others, never himself. The defense was smooth. Too smooth. They talked about growth. Millions of packages. Thousands of employees. They stressed that, statistically, Halesey's had fewer incidents per unit handled than many competitors. They framed the accident as tragic, unfortunate, isolated. They praised Carlos as a hard worker and said the company had provided immediate support, medical care, partial salary continuation, at least at first. They trotted out the phrases that had saved so many executives before. compliance, industry standard, risk profile, and beneath it all, one steady rhythm. You cannot hold one man responsible for every decision in a large organization. He can't be everywhere. He can't control every choice. He sets vision. Others implement. He is, at worst, guilty of trusting the wrong people. Not of malice. Hale nodded along. He liked this story. This was how he saw himself. The architect, not the bricklayer. The one who drew lines. Others executed. If a line was wrong, you didn't blame the pencil. You blamed the hand. He thought the jury would see it the same way. He thought the judge might even respect him. A man who had built something. A man who understood responsibility. He didn't realize yet that this time, responsibility wasn't a talking point. It was the whole point. When Victor took the stand, the tension shifted. He walked as if he were stepping up to a keynote podium. He adjusted his jacket before sitting. He glanced at the jury, gave them a professional, practiced half-smile. A silent message. I'm one of the good ones. I'm reasonable. Trust me. He took the oath with a clear, confident voice. His attorney guided him gently through his biography. Humble beginnings. Scholarship kid. Garage startup. Nights eating ramen while building the first versions of his company. He sprinkled in just enough struggle to sound human. Just enough, I remember being broke once, to sound relatable. Then he pivoted. He spoke of scale, of jobs created, of benefits offered, of charity drives and local investments. He turned himself into a pillar, an asset to the community, someone whose fall would hurt more than help. He acknowledged the accident. He called it a day I will never forget. He looked down, jaw tightening just enough to signal that he was holding back emotion. But his eyes never once drifted toward Carlos. Not naturally, only when prompted. After a while, the performance became obvious. To everyone, except him. It was when the prosecutor began cross-examination that things started to crack. They asked him about specific emails. He called them taken out of context. They asked about safety complaints flagged by floor workers. He called them isolated. They asked about a memo instructing supervisors to mark minor injuries as fatigue-related episodes so they wouldn't appear in official reports. He called it an overzealous interpretation by someone at a lower level. He kept pushing responsibility down the org chart. Away from himself. Always away. But then the prosecutor pulled out something else. A recording. Audio only. A leadership call. Date stamped a few weeks before Carlos's accident. Hale's voice filled the courtroom. I am not interested, the recording said, in why we can't. I am interested in how we will. If people are too soft for this environment, they can go. We are not rewriting our targets because a few of them can't keep up. On the tape, someone timidly mentioned increased injuries. He sighed. Well, his recorded voice said, we have insurance. What we don't have is time. If they don't like it, they can find a slower company to work for. Silence. Thick. Unforgiving. The real Hale, on the stand, shifted. His mouth pressed into a line. That was a private strategy call, he said. It's being mischaracterized. The prosecutor asked, do you deny saying those words? He hesitated. Cameras zoomed. No, he said at last. I said them. This was the moment he should have done the one thing he'd never been good at. Stop talking. Feel. Listen. Instead, he leaned into the one thing he always did. Control. He turned his head. Slowly. Deliberately. Away from the lawyer. Away from the judge. Toward the jury. His eyes locked on them one by one. And when he spoke next, he didn't answer the question. He addressed them. Directly. You've all had jobs, he began, voice low, persuasive. You know what it's like when people complain about working too hard. You know that sometimes, to survive in this world, you have to push. His lawyer tensed. He'd warned him about this. Do not talk to them like employees. But Hale didn't care. He saw faces. He saw leverage. He went on. If we shut down every time someone got tired, he said, nothing would move in this country. No paychecks. No deliveries. No, Mr. Hale. Judge Wapner's voice cut through his argument like a blade. Answer the question that was asked, he said. Do not address the jury unless instructed. Victor turned back toward the bench. His eyes flickered with irritation. He didn't like being interrupted. Not in meetings. Not in interviews. Deeper than that, he didn't like being told what not to do by someone he didn't consider his equal. He started to speak. His tone sharpened. With respect, Your Honor. No, Wapner said. With respect, you will follow the rules of this court. This is not your shareholders' meeting. A few jurors' lips twitched. Not quite smiles. Something darker. Satisfaction. They were watching something rare. A man used to giving orders being publicly reminded he was under someone else's authority. He didn't take it well. Arrogance flared. He straightened, shoulders back. People's livelihoods depend on my company, he said. This isn't just about one man's accident. This is about everyone we employ. I think they deserve to be considered in this. In this courtroom, Wapner interrupted, each word clipped. We are considering the law, the facts, the harm done, not your ego, not your perceived indispensability. The word stung. Ego. Spoken plainly. Without deference. Without padding. Victor's jaw ticked. He was losing control. And for a man like him, that was the one loss he had never prepared for. The toxic behavior escalated from there. Every time the prosecutor pressed on a sore point, he deflected with corporate jargon, then pivoted back to the jury. He rolled his eyes at certain questions. He scoffed when a safety expert testified that Hale's injury rate was unacceptably high. He whispered derisive asides to his attorney, loud enough that a nearby mic caught fragments. They have no idea what it takes to run a company. This is a joke. They're turning a business issue into a morality play. Those fragments weren't meant for the jury, but they reached them. They always do. Tone travels further than words. The jurors watched him with a mixture of fascination and disgust. They had walked into the courtroom maybe unsure, curious. Now, with each passing minute, they saw him clearer. Not as a titan, as a type. The boss who blamed workers for injuries. The executive who saw safety as a cost center. The man who talked about lives only when they were aggregated into a number on a quarterly report. Judge Wapner saw it too. The toxicity, the disrespect, the assumption that he was smarter than everyone else in the room. He let it play a little longer. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a judge can do is simply let someone reveal themselves. Completely. Then hold up the mirror. In front of everyone. Closing arguments came. The prosecution focused on the pattern. They reminded the jury that this was not about the existence of risk in business. It was about the deliberate choice to ignore safety warnings, punish people who spoke up, and treat injuries as background noise. They reminded them of the email labels. Not a daycare machine. Safety as an optional accessory, not a core function. They pointed to Carlos. They didn't overdramatize. They didn't need to. He was the drama. The way he shifted awkwardly in his chair. The way his hands gripped the armrests when he thought the cameras weren't on him. His existence in that chair was louder than any speech. The defense doubled down on scale, on complexity, on the impossibility of one man knowing everything, on bad managers, on unintended consequences. They told the jury that punishing Hale would send a chilling message to all business leaders. That innovation thrives when we don't criminalize every misstep. They tried to scare them into thinking that finding him responsible would cause jobs to disappear, deliveries to slow, their own lives to grow harder. Victor watched their faces. He thought he saw cracks. He thought he saw fear, the kind he could mold. He left the courtroom that day convinced they wouldn't dare. Not to him. Not to someone with his track record. Not when the economy needed people like him. He was wrong, because there was one more voice coming. One that would cut through all of his noise. One that did not flinch from chilling messages. Judge Joseph Wapner cleared his throat. It was time. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. The jury sat, hands folded, faces set, hard. The gallery leaned forward. Phones off, eyes on. Victor sat with his chin lifted, suit immaculate, expression carefully controlled. He told himself, whatever happens, I can handle the spin. I can rebuild. I always rebuild. He was still thinking like a CEO. He hadn't accepted, even now, that he was something else in here. A defendant. Nothing more. Nothing less. Mr. Hale, Judge Wapner said, voice steady, stand. He rose. Slowly. Deliberately. He glanced once at the jury, then at the judge. Still certain he could read their eyes. Still certain he could see a way out. He had no idea. He was already in free fall. He just hadn't felt the bottom yet. The jury, Wapner began, has reached a unanimous verdict. He read it. Every word fell like a weight. Guilty. On counts of negligence. On willful violation of workplace safety regulations. On deliberate misclassification and concealment of injuries. The legal language was precise. The feeling was blunt. You did this. You are responsible, not your managers, not the abstract system. You. Victor's jaw clenched. For a split second, the mask slipped. His lips trembled in something like anger, not at the verdict, at the audacity. He'd always considered juries a risk factor, not a moral force. Now that risk had crystallized into judgment. He exhaled sharply. His attorney's hand touched his arm, a small, useless gesture of comfort. The damage was already done. What came next would decide how deep it went. Judge Wapner folded his hands, looked at him, not as a titan, as a man. Mr. Hale, he said, you have spoken a great deal in this courtroom about scale, about how many packages you ship, how many jobs you create, how much revenue your company generates. He paused. Let's talk about scale, he continued. On the scale of a human spine, one man's spine, your entire quarterly report is meaningless. The line hit like a fist, direct, unflinching. A few people in the gallery closed their eyes. The jurors didn't move. They just watched, taking it in. I have watched you, Wapner went on. Attempt to recast this case as a referendum on business, on progress, on whether or not our economy can tolerate risk. He shook his head. This is not about the economy, he said. This is about you. He leaned forward, just slightly, enough to tighten the air. You are not on trial because you created jobs, he said. You are on trial because you created a culture where people were afraid to say, I am hurt, where supervisors were rewarded for hiding injuries, where safety was secondary to speed. He lifted the email again. We are not running a daycare, he read. We are building a machine. He set it down. Machines, he said, do not bleed, Mr. Hale. People do. And you chose, over and over, to treat people like parts you could run until they broke, then discard. Victor's throat worked. He said nothing. For once, there was nothing left to sell. Your attempts to address the jury directly, Wapner continued, to appeal to their fears, to suggest that holding you accountable would harm them, were transparent and insulting. His voice hardened. You are not here, he said, because of what might happen if we hold you accountable. You are here because of what did happen when you weren't. The line was clean, sharp, real. Victor's gaze dropped. Just for a second. It was the closest thing to humility he'd shown. Not remorse. Recognition. That his usual tactics were bouncing off walls they'd always passed through before. Our system, Wapner said, does not function if men like you can hide behind complexity and scale. If you can always say, I didn't know, while your own words, your own directives, your own incentives built the conditions that hurt people. He shook his head once. In this courtroom, he said, you do not get to turn your knowledge into a fog. You do not get to turn your power into immunity. He took a breath. Here, he finished, your title is stripped. Your company name is just Inc. You are not CEO. You are defendant. He paused. And now you are guilty. Sentencing. The part Victor had always believed he could avoid. Buy down. Negotiate around. He had read articles about white-collar sentencing reform. He had donated to causes. He had attended panels. He had shaken hands with people in expensive suits who always seemed to land light. Bouncy falls, no matter how far they dropped. He expected, at worst, a stiff fine. Maybe house arrest. Maybe some kind of community service where he would give TED-style talks about learning from mistakes. He did not expect what came next. Given the willful nature of your disregard, Judge Wapner said, the pattern of concealment, the scale of harm, and your clear lack of genuine remorse, this court finds that a sentence of incarceration is necessary. The word hit him like a body check. Incarceration. Not theoretical. Not in news stories about other people. In his. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes snapped up. You will, Wapner went on, serve a term in state custody. The duration was not symbolic. Not a slap. Real time. Measured not in weeks. In years. The gallery held its breath. It was one thing to see a bank robber led away. A street-level dealer. A man in torn jeans. This was different. This was a man in a perfect suit, with a perfect resume, with a perfect LinkedIn. Being told, you are going to prison. Not a rest facility. Not a consultant position. Prison. For the record, Wapner added, this court is not making an example of you because you are successful. It is holding you to the same standard it would apply to any person whose decisions caused this magnitude of harm. He didn't leave room for doubt. This is not punishment for being rich, he said. It is consequence for being reckless, ruthless, and dishonest. He wasn't finished. In addition to incarceration, he continued, you are ordered to pay substantial restitution into a fund dedicated to the treatment, rehabilitation, and long-term support of workers injured under your company's policies. He named the figure. It was heavy, even for a man like Hale. Not enough to sink his company alone. Enough to leave a mark. Enough to sting in boardrooms. You will also be barred, he said, from serving as an officer or director of any company operating in sectors that involve physical labor for the duration of your sentence and for a significant period afterward. For the first time, a real flicker of fear passed through Victor's eyes. That wasn't just punishment. That was identity theft. He had built all of his sense of self on 4 letters. C-E-O. Without that, who was he? He wasn't sure. He'd never had to ask. Understand this, Mr. Hale, Wapner said. You spent years wielding power over people's livelihoods. Now, for a time, you will have almost no power at all. No corner office. No executive assistant. No email that can move millions. You will have a number, a schedule, a cell. He paused. Perhaps there, he added, you will finally understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end of decisions you did not make, in a system much bigger than you, controlled by people who do not know your name. Victor exhaled a breath he hadn't known he was holding. His shoulders sank. Not dramatically, just enough to show that something inside him had finally given way. He looked smaller, less polished, almost human. Almost. The bailiff approached. Handcuffs glinted in his hand. 2 rings. 2 cold, simple circles that did not care about net worth or keynote clips. Victor stared at them for half a second. His eyes flared. He turned his head slightly, as if to protest, to assert, to insist. His attorney whispered, don't. He didn't. He extended his wrists. Reluctant. Slow. But he extended them. The metal closed around his skin with a click that echoed in the courtroom silence. He flinched, ever so slightly. There, at last, was the cut. Not to his body, to his ego. It bled in ways cameras could not fully capture. But they tried. They zoomed in on his face, on the way his jaw muscles jumped, on the way his tongue passed over dry lips, on the way his nostrils flared when he realized that, for the first time in decades, he could not simply stand up and walk out of a room. He would be walked by someone else, through a different door, under someone else's authority, not as Victor Hale, CEO, as inmate Hale. The guards turned him. He glanced at the jury. Some met his gaze. Some looked away. None of them looked afraid of him. Not now. Not anymore. He glanced at Carlos. The man in the wheelchair looked back. Calm. Not triumphant. Not vengeful. Just steady. Present. For the first time since this began, their eyes truly met. They held, for a second, one man who would never stand again. One man who had just learned that he would be forced to sit where he did not want to sit. There was a rough, imperfect symmetry in that. Not equality, but consequence. As they led Hale out through the side door, the gallery erupted. Not in cheers. In noise. Tense exhalations. Low murmurs. You see that? About time. That's what should happen. A few people wiped their eyes. Not out of compassion for him. Out of the shock of having seen something they had been told, quietly, their whole lives, almost never happens. Accountability. At that level. On that stage. On camera. Judge Wapner gathered his notes. To him, this was not about virality. It was not about making a point on social media. It was about aligning 2 things that rarely met in public: responsibility and power. He had watched a man walk into his courtroom believing he could play everyone like pieces on a board. And he had watched that man walk out with chains on his wrists. The law had not been perfect. It had been late, hard-won, fragile. But, for a moment, it had been real. Power didn't win. Not this time. Not here. In this narrow room, shielded from shareholder calls and PR firms and press junkets, something old and stubborn had held. The idea that, under certain lights, in front of certain eyes, everyone is just a person. And when that person uses his throne to grind others down, there is, still, somewhere, a chair higher than his, where someone like Joseph Wapner sits. Calm, unimpressed, sharp. And when a CEO tries to intimidate his way out of consequence with a smile, a speech, a stare, that someone can cut his ego in half. With words. With evidence. With a gavel. and leave the pieces where they belong, on the floor.